Hello, and welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited you could join me today. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of Silicon Alley. Today, I sit down with Andrew Hutton, the CEO and founder of Day One, a company that is focused on the future of entrepreneurial education and training. In this episode, we discuss the different types of entrepreneurship and which one is right for you. You'll learn why accelerators like Y-combinator and TechStars are increasingly out of reach and why their business models may not be a fit for you anyway. One of the most insightful takeaways is the idea of a default alive business and why no matter what type of entrepreneurship and business you're building, this is the ultimate state to be in. A little background on Andrew Hutton. Andrew Hutton is the founder and CEO of Day One, a company focused on the future of entrepreneurial education and training. Day One's flagship program is our Fellowship, a 10-week program that's designed to level you up as an entrepreneur and accelerate your business through mentorship, a step-by-step playbook, and a tight-knit community. Before founding Day One, Andrew was Chief Innovation Officer at Human Ventures, a startup studio based in New York City, where he helped launch a dozen companies over a 3-year period. So before we get started, go ahead and pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. And without further ado, I hope that you enjoyed today's founder-focused episode of the Silicon Alley Podcast featuring the Andrew Hutton.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place.
Andrew, welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
William, appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive in because you are deep into entrepreneurship, both in terms of what your business does and as a founder yourself.
Yeah, it's very meta to be building a business that builds a business, following a career of innovation and helping startups through their 0 to 1 journeys. And so, yeah, I feel like I've been swimming in it for a long time. So excited to unpack whatever I can, learning stories, whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that would be a great place to start, Andrew, is thinking about the term entrepreneurship. It's kind of loaded now. It gets thrown around all the time. It's trending, so to speak, on social media. But when you think about entrepreneurship, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I'm actually very much here for the way, well, first off, the fact that entrepreneurship is trending, the fact that it's now one of the more, aspirational jobs that you could have. People go to school not to go be a banker or a consultant or work for IBM, but now to literally go be an entrepreneur, right? And educational institutions are grappling that. The whole world is, but that's a very good thing, right? I think entrepreneurship is one of the skill sets that's never going away. It's one of the it's a driver of not just innovation, the buzzword, but it's a real driver, right? It's really where new things are created, new values created, problems are solved, right? And so I'm really here for the fact that entrepreneurship is trendy and buzzy and popular. I'm also here for, there's a bit of a sliver, I think, of that sort of, there's the Silicon Valley set. There's literally the TV show that just makes fun of it. There's, Shark Tank, whatever it might be. It's out there. There's a popular version of it, but I think I don't know if it's the leading edge, but there's a leading edge of entrepreneurship that's going through its sort of the next transformation of what does it mean to be a builder? And it's adding in a lot of other words, a maker, a creator. There's things like the passion economy. There's this real opening up of the entrepreneurial landscape to not just the startup founder with a Patagonia vest on, but to entrepreneurs who do all sorts of things, right? Whether it's creating a podcast like this or a growth tech fast growth startup or everything in between, So I'm a big fan and proponent of all these kind of evolving and really expanding definitions of entrepreneur and what it means. And I think the world's way better off for it, right? And so entrepreneurship for me is that exciting. I'm glad to be talking about it and playing and really continuing to open up some of those definitions so that more and more people can see themselves as entrepreneurs, so that more and more people can kind of take up the mantle and either be entrepreneurial heck in their day job, it doesn't matter, or to go build a new thing, to go build a new business. So yeah, it's a very exciting kind of word for me. I think it really does represent where the future, a lot of where progress will be made and a lot of how sort of, the economy is evolving and changing.
Yeah. No, Andrew, and I think you bring up a really good point that there's so many different definitions, right? Entrepreneurship, we we kind of all have our own sort of, not template, but we kind of bucket, here's what an entrepreneur looks like. But in reality, there's so many different flavors. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And I definitely want to dive into that further. But before we do, I'd love to just get a little bit more on your background and hear more about your entrepreneurial journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back, my earliest forays onto entrepreneurship, I didn't even have sort of like a model or even like the noun entrepreneur in mind. I was just going to do a thing or do this thing or that thing. I was being entrepreneurial without knowing it. And frankly, I think a lot of folks find themselves in that bucket. So the first thing I did, I was, I won't go too deep into these stories, but I was going to go be a lawyer right out of undergrad. I was in pre-law. I had an internship. I was going to go be Sam Seaborn from the West Wing and just like argue my way to the Supreme Court, only for at the 11th hour for me to switch career paths, right? Say no to that. Did enough, this kind of soul searching a 22-year-old can do, but found myself just finishing college without much of a direction except for business. And I got tapped on the shoulder by a friend to actually go overseas, go to Uganda in East Africa and work on a farm with him, actually building an agribusiness from scratch. And that was my first foray into entrepreneurship, more like general managership. But I was there. I was, basically deciding how we were going to build this business, how to make it grow, how to make it, even stay afloat. And so got thrown into the deep end of a crazy form of entrepreneurship without knowing what it was I was doing. And I'll tell you, that's where I sort of lived a lot of life, learned a lot of lessons, and with a lot of time removed, really came to kind of learn and embody a core, not lesson of entrepreneurship, but reality is that you're going to grow more as an entrepreneur than you will in any other endeavor in your life. You are going to hit every wall personally, functionally, with your skills, with your emotions, with just like what the market will take. And you're going to have to find ways through. You're going to figure out the edge of your like grit and how much you can do. And so that was that first 6 months experience. It literally took me to the edge of myself. I had to go home. I was like, I can't build this business anymore. And, but I survived and I learned.
Why Uganda? Like why
oh
the agribusiness? What drew you there? Like how did your buddy convince
That's
you?
the thing. It was for me, just highly fortuitous, highly just, a friend who was much more thoughtful and ambitious. So it's really my friend's story, but he was building a social business. He wanted to help the people over there. He got, as people might do, got connected with an orphanage over there, I think through his church, and really was, smart enough to say, let's just do something a little more sustainable. Let's build a business instead of just sending donations over all the time. And he kind of started to, throw his hat over the wall, built the foundations for this, realized that he needed sort of people over there with him. And that's where I came into the picture. And I was just up for an adventure. I was like, I don't know what this is. I haven't taken a business class yet. I'm like a great student, but we'll see what the real world has for me.
Better than law school.
Way better than law school. To all the lawyers out there, hope you're happy. Like, no, it's a great profession, but it wasn't going to be for me. And I mean, I don't know if there's any lessons to that. If I had to like step back, what I did, like I said, like jumping over ledges to go do the thing is the best way to grow. I would recommend everybody, if you ever come to that like path in the woods moment, to just do the thing for sure, especially when you're young enough where, you don't have much holding you back. That was kind of the logic in and that I was going through. But also just, but yeah, you'll just fail forward. You'll learn things. That's how my experience went. So yeah, no grand scheme of that. Didn't even know that I was being entrepreneurial. I came back from that experience wanting to do more stuff in the game. I wanted to be more entrepreneurial, but here's what I did. I asked who makes stuff, and I said designer in my head. And so I actually started a path to go figure out how to be a designer. So I went to Parsons School of Design in New York, went to design school. I went to business design school. And in a windy way, that started my entrepreneurial career because I was learning this design thinking toolkit. I was learning how designers think, but applying it to business. So I learned it in grad school, this whole school of thought, started to apply it as a consultant, which most consultants will eventually tell you they want to get closer to the action. It's, PowerPoints and decks and
Yep.
models don't really cut it if you're entrepreneurial. And so fast forwarding a number of years, it was that desire plus that skill set that led me to startups. And another fortuitous move, I got recruited to join a startup studio. So I got recruited to join what is maybe the consulting version of Startup Land. I was working on many businesses over the course of the 3 or so years I was there. And yeah, we were launching businesses. I was the player coach, helping these businesses get started. And so it was the perfect opportunity to convert my design thinking background and my consulting experience into startups. So I don't know. It feels linear in hindsight. It felt super messy along the way.
Can you define what player coach is? Because you mentioned the term player coach. What does that mean for folks that aren't familiar?
Yeah. So I just use it to say inside of this institution, Human Ventures, a startup studio, it was called Human Ventures. It is a startup studio. Inside of Human, I was both guiding the entrepreneurs. So I was the coach in that role. I was kind of architecting their journey, being like, okay, here's where you are. We're going to do this first. We're going to do that second. Hey, you're not asking good questions of those customers. You're leading the witness. Like, I know your passion for this is like how I would interact. I know you're passionate about that topic, but you got to listen to what the customer says, right? So I was the coach, but then at times I'd be like, let's just go a little faster. I'm going to go set up this landing page. Let's go rock it, right? Let's go build. And so it was a 50-50 role of being a founder and kind of feeling what it's like to try new things, see if they're going to work. But also I was outside the game as well, because I had a paycheck. I was, building inside of this institution, and ultimately these founders were going to carry on. And so it's, again, only in hindsight now that I'm building my own thing with Day One, which is again meta, because we support entrepreneurs as well, that I very much know the difference between a player coach and a player in the game, right? Like, being an entrepreneur is its own, you don't understand it until you understand it. And it brings me back to my Uganda days of like, that's right. It's all on you. If you don't get it right, if you don't do the thing, it's not going to get done. That's not to say you don't delegate and have a team, et cetera. But you're creating something out of nothing, and you can't rely on the machine around you to hum like an established organization. Yeah. You're working with what you got. So yeah, that whole journey, tons of kind of continuing learnings about like, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? But yeah, Human Ventures led to Day One pretty directly. My time as a consultant with, a design thinking background led to startups and Human Ventures, and man, got my kickoff in Uganda. So that's the short version. That's about the short version.
Yeah. So Andrew, what was the impetus then? Because you were working with startups, as you said, you were this player coach. You had the salary, but you didn't have kind of the same skin in the game, so to speak. What was the impetus to go from, being essentially in a startup accelerator type organization to start your own with Day One? What was that impetus?
Yeah, it was really ultimately the impact that I wanted to have. So I was in Human Ventures and most of venture capital works with a small-ish number of companies, right? Some have wider views, right? An accelerator might accept a big class. Y-combinator has hundreds plus startups each class. But even so, all of venture capital, if you're stewarding somebody else's money and investing it, you're going to say no a lot more than you say yes, right? Hopefully you're picking, you're a capital allocator. So you're saying no a whole lot. And so I'm not good at saying no. I'm actually get really excited when I see a startup, and maybe it's one of my faults, but it's also, I think, one of my superpowers to basically help them find the way to make the thing work, right? I'm a kind of forever optimist in that perspective that if you want me to, I can yes you forward in a real way, right? I've learned over time to put my no hat on, to put my maybe that's just a bad idea sort of thing, right? So I can give that advice. But I wanted to say yes a lot more personally, right? And I wanted to take the sort of means of production that we had gathered at a place like Human Ventures, the expertise, the communities, the networks, and in my world, everything but the capital. So I wanted to unbundle the capital and recreate a place that we could say yes to maybe everybody, right? So that we could help as many entrepreneurs as humanly possible go from nothing to something. So I was like, I'm really good at going from nothing to something, but I'm shooting six shots a year. What if I shot 600 shots a year? What if I helped 600 founders a year? And so it was that sort of how might we kind of question that led to the model that is Day One and all the things we're doing and evolving to become, and just trying to help as many founders as possible.
Yeah, no, I love that. And definitely want to dive into a little bit more about Day One, but can you give an example of some of the yes sort of like coaching that you've done, or do you have an example of how you've applied that successfully to other startups and how you would advise someone that wanted to kind of run that same scenario within their own business?
Yeah. So here's like one of the big ways that I think what we get to do is a more honest and more optimistic way to help startups than really anything the venture world is set up to do. Now, there's a lot of, and maybe majority, great actors within the venture world who will help founders day in and day out, but the incentives are somewhat misaligned at times. And what that might come down to is if a founder is building, has a passion for a problem and starts to build a business, it might be a small business. It might be a business with a customer that doesn't have a massive market, that doesn't have the potential to get huge, right? And whereas a VC or anybody who's kind of walking somebody down the road towards venture investments will probably tell them, your market's too small, right? Maybe go find a bigger market. I would tell them, first off, search your soul. Do you want to go build a venture business? Must you be the CEO of $1 billion company? Or might you build a small business? Might you build something that serves the customer you care about, that kind of is the type of business you'd like to build, gets to the scale that's really meaningful for you? And let's go figure out how to build that business. And so in some ways, I'm saying yes to your passion, yes to your premise, to your desire to go solve this customer, and just like not worrying about the size of the market, because only venture capitalists care about market size. The world is really big. The internet is making it bigger. Almost every business that I've run across is a viable business if you just set your expectations right. The only problem is when a VC sees a $50 million business and says that's a bad outcome. Wild. $50 million is life-changing for everybody, right? The vast majority of the world, and like the vast majority of the world. And I will always say, let's figure out how to get that done, right? And so it's not necessarily easy. Well, going the venture route is not the easiest. So it's not like we're saying we're going to go the harder route versus this venture route, right? Yeah. It's just going a different route, and it might be way more honest to you. In fact, you might just be way better suited to it. Running a venture business is this like very niche skill set in this very niche type of journey. And so, yeah, I love helping people basically figure out, and a lot of that is a triage of what do you want to do? Like, really, like, are you playing the venture game because it's all you know? Like, let's understand, what do you want? Let's understand what you're good at. If you're just really not that good at the like sales life, the schmoozing, the corp dev, the board meetings, don't be a big company CEO, right? Like, maybe stay small, maybe be the master of your own destiny and have no board to report to and go golfing all the time. Yeah. I don't care, right? So figure out what you want, figure out what you're good at, figure out who you're serving, figure out what the market can support, figure out how to build it, figure out what you're great at. So there's basically a finite number of things to think through that really does set your constraints, your parameters. And the designer in me, the design thinker in me, basically says constraints breed creativity. Constraints breed momentum. When you know your lanes, now you can go down them, right? And now you can say, I don't have to fall victim to analysis paralysis of I could do everything. What am I going to do with my life? No, we're here and we're going to go do it, right? Or I'm going to go do the work to go do it, to go find the thing on the other side of iteration and failure and create the whole 9 yards. So big picture doesn't change, but small picture, yeah, I love helping people just find their real thing and just get started, So there's a ton of founders in Day One that would probably not get, a second look from a VC. And I'm just so here for it, right? I just want to help them get the thing started, bootstrap it, whatever it might be, right? So that's part of that like expanding definition,
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing it back there. And I think there's so many other ways to build a business versus going to the kind of venture, let's go raise as much money as possible and scale as quickly as possible and all that. So can you talk a little bit about the different flavors of entrepreneurship there and what you support? And as you said, it sounds like Day One supports all, but can you talk about like some of those other flavors for an entrepreneur that maybe is in the early stages or trying to figure out like, which route should we go?
Yeah. I think as funding goes, we're in this new world where, your first sort of like glance at startups, if you just, read some of the books or follow some of the blogs on Twitter or whatever it might be, you'd be like, man, I'm raising every 18 months. It's like this thing, right? It's like this train. Cool. Common wisdom, maybe, well, it's probably right only because it's common, right? We've started to see enough success stories that do things very differently. Raise a little bit here, 500K, and don't raise anything for 10 years. Grow a little bit over a decade, like Roblox just went public today. And if you look at their valuation chart, it's pretty slow. They get big. They're a couple billion. It's not like it's a small business.
Yeah.
But there's a massive shoot up at the end. We had a chat in our first cohort with the founder of Bubble, which is a no-code building platform. And they bootstrapped for 7 years before raising their first round of venture. So we're seeing all of these different ways to go about raising a little, raising nothing, raising later. And it really should just blow up all these conceptions. It's not like you have to follow this formula. You can just build your business. And what I would suggest founders sort of conceive of, what I would love to kind of frame and create and have everyone talk about is there's like an inception phase that really should be agnostic to funding. It really should be. It should be about all those things I described before, the questions about what do you want? What does your customer want? We live in a world where if you can't go make some progress with like tools and easy platforms to find your customer, with easy ways to build and prototype, maybe you shouldn't be a founder, right? Like there's easy ways to go do it where capital is not really needed, order of magnitude thousands of dollars, single digit thousands of dollars to go through these phases, right? And I know that's not actually quite accessible to everyone, but like it's way less than it was 5 years ago, even 15, much less 15 years ago, right? So I think there's this new phase that all founders should go through, which is this discovery phase. It's a pre-product. You're not getting to product market fit. You're getting to something closer to like conviction, where you've got enough, you've been in the game long enough that you know it's for you. You actually really like doing this. You've talked to enough customers to have a sense, this is where this is going. You've built something to get a sense that, oh yeah, I can do this. And you've started to network, all the pieces are starting to come together. It's that phase, that sort of agnostic before you like come out of your cocoon and then pick hypergrowth and then pick slow growth and then pick bootstrap and then pick an earnest capital, shared earnings agreement type of deal. So that's what I want to kind of institute. And that's really what day one serves, right? Day one serves the founder when they're in that phase. So largely pre-funded, but again, we kind of take and work with everybody such that if you have funding, it's not a problem. You just kind of picked your path, if you will. And yeah, it's like the primordial soup. It literally, everyone is doing the same thing and they should be doing the same thing, regardless of whether you're going to build literally a solo business or whether you're going to try to shoot for the moon. You should be understanding your customer intimately. You should be defining that market in as niche and as narrow way as possible. You should be understanding what your value is and how to build it. You should be understanding, can you build it sustainably and make money? Mm-hmm. Does your business model level out? And how do you position those two things together? And then I guess, how do you go to market and how do you fundraise? So there's a number of things. So I'm not like spilling them off. That's most of them, frankly. But so yeah, I'm kind of answering your question of like other different types to say the part that I love to play in the early stage, I don't think there are. And then you start to splinter and then you start to go and you're like, oh, well, I'm building a healthcare business, which has this weird dynamic and it's like B2B to C and there's government regulation. I need to find healthcare people. Great, fine. Go find your people, right? It's like going from primary school to specialized high school to college. Eventually you like all find your specific niche, but when you're in primary school, you're all learning the same 6 subjects. That's actually a really good metaphor. I'm going to run with that. Not to say like day one is like primary school. It's like, it's super basic, but kind of is it's actually.
That early
it's like
stage, right? Yeah. That early stage of entrepreneurship where you've got 1,000 ideas and one person says one thing or something else. And you don't quite have the inception yet of what the actual, business is really going to look like, because maybe you haven't done some of those things you talked about, like really spending time with the customer, understanding the problem, understanding what potential solutions could solve that problem the best, and how you're uniquely positioned to potentially solve that. Yeah.
We're trying to create the sandbox where those pieces come together. It's pretty much that simple. And It's an unavoidable path in the process. If you skip it, you're going to regret it straight up. Like, believe that. We'll go to my grave on, we'll die on that hill, right? You have to do this work, whether you do it in a long time or a short time, whether you do it well or not, whether you have fun along the way, whether you build like strong foundations or whether you sort of skate by and are like, now I'm building, but I don't know anybody. Now I'm building, but I have no momentum, like, or I'm just burnt out maybe, right? Whatever it might be. There's good and bad ways to go through that, but absolutely it's your foundations.
Yeah. So I kind of want to run with that last piece. There's good and bad ways. What is some advice that you hear given to entrepreneurs that's bad advice, that's kind of like thrown out there all the time? Like what's a piece of bad advice that you hear?
Yeah. I'll come back to the idea of like focusing on market size. No founder should focus on market size. That's my like first contrarian thing. That slide should not exist in your deck, right? They also shouldn't focus on competition, but most people do say that, right? Early stages, if you're doing it right, competition shouldn't matter. It's more about, do you have a customer? But same with market size. There's two things that'll go, there's like two outcomes, right? If you, well, there's probably more than two outcomes, but there's two main ways that I think it usually plays out, right? One is, if you're building a proper backable business, if you're building software technology, you still want to start really small because you're going to want to start with a group that's common and kind of knows you and you know them to adopt this new technology. If it's new enough, you're going to have to sort of build for the future, build for people living in the future. And then eventually you're going to get to mass market, right? Eventually the world will come to you. And so if you're building actually for the future, for new technology and software, go find those early adopters, in Paul Graham parlance, people living in the future, build for them, and then everyone will follow, right? And so that involves niche, and it involves not sizing that market. I saw somebody post recently that like even Uber, which knew exactly what they were doing, thought their market size was $3 billion. And that was big enough to get people excited, but it's like orders of magnitude off of what the real market size for what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
It's just silly to try, even if you're trying to be big, right? So that's one. And then two, the other one is you just stay small, meaning you serve that small niche. Maybe it's not a future niche. Maybe it's just like your niche. Maybe it's your weird corner of Reddit, right? Maybe it's just the people you know, and just serve them and stay small and have 10,000 customers or whatever it might be. And so I just don't think there's other businesses that could get smushed because you have ambitions, but you truly build into like a red ocean sort of market. That's not cool. You might flame out there, but I think most of the reasons businesses fail can be solved by kind of setting your trajectory and your expectations right. You know, if you think you're going to be a unicorn, but then you shoot for a red ocean market, you're going to die because there's no way you can like spend enough money to compete away enough customers to reach scale. A lot of those D2C businesses that raise a ton of money wound up in that category, right?
Yeah. And so just quickly, D2C, direct to consumer. And then can you also just quickly, since you brought up red ocean, can you explain the concept between red ocean and blue ocean?
Yeah. I also don't, I definitely don't have the book answer because I know it's a book. I know it's like a proper theory, but I'm using a very common way to think about it of a crowded market, right? Are you going towards a market that is essentially saturated and you're trying to be better than the competition? Or are you trying to recreate a category and say like, no one's solving this problem today? Like, in fact, they're both hard, right? Yeah. Are you actually 10x better than your competition? Some are, right? Casper might have been like Tuft & Needle, Casper, and then an infinite number of bed in the boxes, right? So a red ocean market got beat and then it completely got competed away. Now it's still red ocean, right? So you have to nail the timing for these, like for most of these direct to consumer businesses, these product businesses. Software is often not red ocean, meaning there's a lot of the world that needs software that's not even come close to having it, right? That's why Andreessen says software is eating the world, because it's true and it still has a long way to go. So shorthand, if you're building software, you're probably in a good spot. You still have to do everything else I said, but you have a good upside. Like there's a few of these shortcuts to like kind of think through some of these analytics, but don't pay attention to your market. Don't pay attention to your competition. Pay attention to your like tiny little customer subset, build for them. That's out there enough. I'm not being that iconoclastic to say those kinds of things. I'll say the one thing that, again, I think a lot of folks are coming around to, but I'll just like keep adding to the groundswell is founders really need to take care of themselves, right? Founders, it's about that idea of trajectory and expectations. So why does a company fail? Because it runs out of money. Why does a company run out of money? Because you spent more money than you had, and you were set up for one thing and you didn't achieve it, right? And the most common thing is it's like we couldn't raise another round, so we shut down. Well, why not find a way to build a business that is default alive? Again, Paul Graham, the like father of startups, also talks about this kind of stuff. Get default alive, meaning if you could not raise a cent more, this business would float. Somehow your revenues are more than your costs, right? The idea of ramen profitable, like it can sustain you.
Yeah.
I like fully ascribe to those beliefs. Get to a place where you can build this without anyone else's say so or permission. And now you're set up to succeed because the journey is longer than you think, straight up. Whatever you think it is, account for more time. And the smart way to account for that more time is just to account for an infinite runway. And I mean that literally financially, but also like emotionally or, in like health and wellness ways, right? Like don't burn yourself out. Don't burn your relationships out. Don't burn your bank account out, right? And so if you can, if you can survive, you'll succeed. And actually you'll succeed in one of two ways. Your business will succeed or you will come away with all these learnings. If you go through an entrepreneurial journey and don't truly make it, but you've set yourself up for a long run of surviving, of like a sustainable way to build, man, your job prospects are through the roof when you finish that, right? You are really marketable, right? That's the best MBA you could go get. So again, back to square one. There's really no reason not to kind of jump ship and do these kinds of things.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought up the point, Andrew, of being a default alive business. I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. And even if you do decide to go the venture route, if you were default alive, meaning you don't have to raise money in 18 months in order to keep the lights on, you're in a much stronger position to raise money. And when you think about the businesses that have done that really successfully, they're the ones that, raise another round 2 months after they have just raised 1 or 3 months at a, 100x valuation or 10 valuation or whatever it is, right? When you think of like an Instagram or, well, they weren't default profitable, but they had a different model. But like you think about like some of the companies recently during the pandemic that have been able to raise money to keep because they're doing really well.
It's, it comes back to like the narratives that we talk about, right? The narratives that look super flashy are the ones that create the most buzz, and it clouds out the fact that, create a profitable business, run it, grow it profitably for 5 years, and then go back to raise money. You'll be very happy with your valuation, I promise. And you'll hold all the cards, meaning not only will you have a valuation that you like, you'll be able to play the game in the right way, right? Versus setting yourself up to need to raise every 18 months and just like basically, you've set yourself up for failure. It's like everyone knows that you're playing this like weird FOMO trap, and again, the world is sort of ready for it. Like there's a lot of weird FOMO dynamics in venture, but that is the tiniest sliver of entrepreneurship, right? The number of entrepreneurs who are actually playing these like high flung VC games, right? And like competing term sheets between like Andreessen and Founders Fund is like, it's like probably double digits, not even 3, right? Maybe it's 3 digits. Maybe the world is bigger than so it's bigger. But it's not a lot. And the vast majority of entrepreneurs and the vast majority of people listening, meaning you as an entrepreneur, if you want to get there, it's going to take some steps. And you probably don't want to get there. You probably just want to go build a great business and be happy and have a, sustainably big thing, or go retire on a beach or something in between. Right. And so, let's just like make that a pretty darn glorified outcome. And I think more people will go for it. It's really narrative in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that, Andrew. One thing that I'm curious about, and this is something that I've personally struggled with as well, is that there are a lot of different accelerators, incubators, corporate like there's all these slightly different flavors.
Hmm.
Can you talk to me about like the incubation type space itself and
Yeah.
how, if I'm an entrepreneur, how the heck do I sort through the noise and figure out like what's a good fit for me and my business?
Yep. I think the biggest innovation that accelerators are like the biggest chunk of the where you might go model, right? So a startup studio, like where I got my start, is actually a pretty niche niche model for how to build a startup. Most folks will not go that route. Could definitely unpack that. Incubators actually, I think, are maybe the older route, like the idea of like an incubator at a university or like a government run space that's kind of gives the idea of it's slow versus an accelerator. Like you're here to just like build. Also not necessarily the most common route. So an accelerator is definitely the thing to talk about, right? The idea of an accelerator, what accelerators have become today. And I think the biggest business model innovation that got accelerators where they are is the fact that they have an application. They're accessible, right? And so you don't need to know the person who knows the person who knows the person to get a partner meeting. You can just apply, right? And they want volume. They have a funnel. That's how they do their thing. So accelerators are, a 15-year-old innovation. Really the first and now biggest is Y-combinator, started in 2005. And accelerators are pretty great, but the reason why they're great is because you know them, because you can find them, right? And so if you are a founder who's kind of looking for that first check, an accelerator is going to be one of your easier stopping points, right? So that's all very true. I think there's one reality to accelerators that is true, is that all accelerators follow the entropy of venture, which is they go downstream over time, right? They might not change their investment profile, but they're always looking for better and better, more mature companies. Because why wouldn't you? If your first batch if their first applicant pool has 100 companies, they pick the best 10. Now they have a higher profile. They get 500 companies. The best 10, if they're still doing that model, are probably that much further along. So all accelerators, as they become more valuable, start to become further out of reach for founders. So I think that's just a reality. And all venture does that. If you're a founder and you're truly navigating, like, where does my first 50K come from? Where does my first sort of like, how do I actually get started? I'd say there's two things. One is there is a new breed of early stage pre-seed, like properly pre-seed venture capital firms that are intended to write very fast, very small checks. So a venture firm like Hustle Fund is maybe the best example of this, right? In fact, their whole model is to get a 25K check out the door ASAP, and then see if they should put in, more, maybe a little bit later, right? But a first 25K check can do a lot of wonders for somebody who's in that like primordial soup stage, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're going to this like pre-seed funds, or frankly, there's many, many, many more like micro funds and angels. Rolling funds are now a thing where an angel can start to create a fund out of essentially retail investors, right? There's rules changed in terms of who can invest in accreditor investing rules and things like that. And so if you're really looking for your first 50 to 100K, that's the environment you're probably playing in. These like but these small pre-seed funds or angels, and these sort of what they call solo GPs, basically people who might have a fund behind them, but it's a $5 million fund. So it's a micro fund and they're the only person. So they might as well be an angel, but enough people put 5 million behind them to back their deal flow.
Yeah.
And to be fair, accelerators are a little downstream of that, right? Accelerators have gotten to the point where most of them, are downstream of that early capital, even though they might still only be putting in 100K. It's not actually enough for like a seed round. They are, and here's like the final kicker why, right? An accelerator's whole business model, as much as it's the biggest innovation is the application, the fact that they can get a lot of deal flow, is that 3 months after they invest in you, they put you in front of 100 other investors for a demo day and they book you up, right? And so their whole business model is based on in, out, get you, raised at a 2x valuation and then do it again. Entire business model, and it kind of works. What that means is they're trying to get companies that are essentially ready for seed and then they're going to like dress you up and get you out there, right? They're getting you when hoping that you're ready for seed, and then they just get you over that final 1 yard line, right? All that to say, if you're an early stage founder, to get to almost ready for seed, to get to the 1 yard line, you still have to go those 99 yards, right? So I kind of just unpacked the funding landscape, which is like I've kind of been saying it's not the whole kit and caboodle, right? There should be a lot more than just the funding landscape. I'll kind of simply say that's why day one exists, is to try to be in this like barren, literally the first 99 yards before you get to the 1 yard line of an accelerator. Even if you take money from an angel who's around to really help you, yes, those angels should be helping you for sure, right? Hustle Fund is amazing. They'll help you. But again, if you're not going VC, if you're not ready, whatever those things might be, what other ways can we support folks, right? And that's the big question.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, appreciate that. So that's interesting thinking about accelerators and how they go further downstream as you get it makes sense as you become more popular, you get more applicants. That means you can filter out and you get higher and higher quality companies further along, more established.
Further along. And to be fair, higher quality, like if they're good pickers, they'll pick businesses that are, they'll get further along. They'll get more venture backable. So two companies could be equal. They'll pick the one with the bigger market, not the company's fault, but the market's fault, and they'll pick the one with the bigger market. And then maybe higher quality, right? Not all companies are equal. So if they're good at their jobs, they'll do that. But again, if you get told no by an accelerator, if this is the kind of like death cycle that I hate. You get told no by an accelerator, you get told no by a lot of accelerators. You're too far along to think you're at the beginning. Like you're just going to spiral, right? There's nobody helping you. And maybe that's the natural end of this startup, is you shot for that shot. And now you're, if you don't make it, you don't make it. And 90+% of startups die pretty early. And so, but man, I wish we could change that trajectory, right? I don't think you can, you're not solving for it when you get told no 50 times. You have to solve, I want to solve for it upstream, set you on a better track, get you to apply only when you're ready, put you on a trajectory where if you get told 100 times no, you're still fine. And so I just think, I don't know. It's like, we're in this world, we have to like change the ecosystem, and we picked our spot.
Yeah. Could you share either an example of a company that you've worked with, or maybe an entrepreneur that you kind of want to like emulate, or that you look up to, that hasn't gone venture route? We've been talking about it, and I think that's one of the things that it sounds like from a differentiator for day one, is that you don't necessarily have to go that route. Is there a company that you've worked with, or an example of someone that that really sticks out, that fits more of that? Let's not go raise $1 million right away and end up on that 18th month. I need another money.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the stories I'm thinking about. I kind of already mentioned Emmanuel, the founder of Bubble, who was telling us their story when we launched our first cohort. And he has a story that I think actually is a lot like a lot of founders, meaning he was a consultant. He was working at a Fortune 500 job. He was sort of, a business person, right? Really smart, really ambitious, wanted to get into startups, was meeting with lots of people, ended up having a very random meeting with somebody who had the idea for Bubble, and it started to hit it off, right? And now together so then they just jump in and start building. And this was before no code was like a real thing. They were building the future for no code. So they're pretty technical, and they got the job done. But in the end, they just said, what can we do? And let's go do it ourselves, right? Now, they had built up enough of a cushion that they could go do it for a long time. They weren't necessarily making sales in their first 6 months or a year, or maybe even more, right? So they were ready for that long-term journey, right? One way or the other. But they built products. They built a janky product that turned out to be 10x better than the alternative. And they found their niche customer who was like, I'm going to become an ambassador for this. And they absolutely built the business like one brick at a time, right? One really happy customer who went up a steep learning curve to learn their new thing, because ultimately it was that much better. So, whether you're that company or you're trying to raise money, success hinges on being 10x better. And that's like a trope for sure. The idea of being 10x better. But I think it's something that a lot of early stage founders don't have a feel for. They don't have a sense for, is my idea 10x better? and it's very cloudy. You don't really know if you're 10x better until your thing is out there and it's working or not. That's the real minds. Like that's really what gets you as a founder is you're like in the middle and you don't know if you're on the track up or down. But having that sense for, am I really building a strong thing is like the number one differentiator. So that's just an aside that I think they embodied. But the other kinds of folks that, there's a whole like sweaty startup movement, like people who own like storage facilities and like porta potty businesses. Like those are kind of gross and literally sweaty startups. But folks who hang around the Earnest Capital team and Tyler Tringas are all building bootstrap businesses, so SaaS businesses. There's no reason why if you're a coder or developer that you can't start to build on the side, maybe take a sabbatical and go build, right? And put a software product out there that is as functional enough for someone to start paying you. And there's this whole journey. It's the indie hackers, the indie makers journey, right? Of, hey, let's get a business to 10,000 MRR, and then let's get a little higher, right? And you might be doing that all on your own. But there's people like Tyler Tringas in Earnest Capital, Andrew Wilkinson of Tiny Capital, invests and buys these businesses, is sort of the Warren Buffett for digital startups, which I think is pretty cool. And so and Tyler especially was a B2B SaaS founder, lived this life, bootstrapped it. And so someone like Tyler is definitely changing the game, both as a former operator and now as an investor, in putting even a stamp in the ground of a new kind of investment vehicle with Earnest Capital and what they do. Andrew's just fun to watch in terms of how they've built. But yeah, the sweaty startups, they call them calm. Earnest calls them calm businesses. I would say another way I even answer that question of founders I admire is I'm coming back to my time at Human Ventures when we were working with founders in the studio. There's two traits of founders that are embodied that I really, really admire. One is, frankly, grit, right? And just tenacity to just be a bit of a tornado and go get stuff done. So the founding team of this company, Tiny Organics, is a food company, frozen baby food with like exotic flavors to help kids have like expanded palates. Great idea, simple idea, really great. They've started to take off. But early on, they were playing in a pretty red market. Like every baby got fed one way or the other, right? And so it's not like they were, Gerber was a competitor. That's not a small deal. But they were just tenacious. And like we would give them all sorts of harsh feedback, and they sometimes took it good and sometimes bad, but they were just tenacious, right? And the two founders, Betsy Ford and Sophia Laurel, are just like amazing. The other kind of founder that I really, really admire is the multi-tool founder, right? And so the founder that I think about to epitomize this is this founder. His name is Guillaume Scali. He's a French guy who's been building startups in New York for a little bit, and he blew me out of the water in terms of being a design thinking business designer. He didn't need me as a player coach, but we had a fun time anyway. And yeah, it's something special to be able to build landing pages, build user flows, do Facebook ads, talk to lawyers, like do the whole 9 yards. And I look at someone like that and I think about building a business is hard in many ways, but it also requires you to be like a polymath. You have to have like a dozen skill sets that no other job requires of you, right? From being able to negotiate this, to be able to ship that product, to be able to speak engineer.
Yeah.
And I've never seen it more than this my friend G, and so not to say it's easy, but like if you can get somewhere, those are the kinds of places to be. Those folks are exceptional.
Yeah. No, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And definitely sounds like you need to go connect with some of these folks and go follow them and see what they're doing. So, Andrew, I'm curious, when you think about yourself as an entrepreneur and just in life in general, how do you define success? Like, what does that really look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's creating something that people want. Maybe this is me just wanting to get to that plateau as an entrepreneur where there's, that sustainably successful business, right? I don't need hyper growth. I don't need to be on the cover of anything, but to have built something from scratch that in its sum is both desirable, people want it, but also creates value for them and for me. There's some like platonic purity, like platonic form of good in that. That's the business designer in me. So my job at Human Ventures and before that, if there was a role that I really love, it's the idea of a business designer, meaning I'm going to not just design a thing, a graphic, a piece of furniture. I'm going to design a whole business. And to design a business and then execute it to see that it works is pretty darn cool. So I would say my current mode of success is to design a business with all its multiple facets that works, which means it creates so much value for a customer, that it creates enough value for me, that it creates enough value for an ecosystem, whatever, again. So in that way, that's a little bit of how I think about it, and definitely looking to kind of make a mark in terms of, making, it's like my highest form of art, right? Is a business that is well designed, that it hums and flows, and maybe it's so well designed that I can step away from it at some point. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
that's
I love
success.
that. No, I like that definition a lot, Andrew. And it's really interesting having that sustainable business, one that is leaving a legacy, having an impact. I'm curious, you kind of mentioned this earlier on when you were talking about the importance of finances and business, but could you describe your own relationship with money?
It's been refined now that I advise a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm in this boat myself of saying, okay, have I found myself in a sustainable place to build? When I give the advice to folks, I'm like, listen, here's a few ways you can get sustainable. You can make a lot of money and just give yourself a huge runway. Check. You can freelance on the side, maybe. You can keep your day job and build on the side, right? You can maybe get some freelancing gigs, right? Or take your costs really low and do a little bit of this. Or you can have a spouse. So that's my current situation. I have plenty of, well-paying gigs along the way. And my wife is a consultant for the UN. And it's sort of my turn to take a shot sort of thing. That's like a lot of the bottom line, like being supported. And it's like a huge privilege that I don't, take for granted. But ultimately, my like relationship to finances does boil down to that sort of like, where are we in a sustainable path? And I guess you do have to layer in various time horizons to think about that, right? Are we sustainably going to retire? Are we sustainably for the next year, for whatever time frame? Yeah. Knowing there's unknowns along the way, yada, 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 right? So I don't know. I feel like I've always had a decent relationship with money, in finances, just an okay-ish head on my shoulders for saving and putting an investment or two in play. But being an entrepreneur sort of puts all your eggs in one basket. Is not good financial advice. The expected value of it is probably not worth it, all things equal, in terms of the opportunity cost, in terms of missing a rally like we just saw, like all that jazz. But to be fair, here's like my biggest point of wisdom, right? Everything like that lasts in life is the function. Everything that has like real meaning and importance is the function of something irrational. Almost by definition, because if you did the irrational thing, you would be completely average, and your interest would be average, your outcomes would be average, your legacy, your humor, everything would be average, and no one would remember you. So if you want to have any kind of legacy, you have to do non-average things, which the expected value of those is probably irrational, right? So that's a little like, Spockish like math to say like, sometimes just throw your hat over the wall, right? And do a thing. It's also the core conceit of Hamilton, which is Hamilton wanted to do something crazy and he became known, whereas Aaron Burr wanted to just like be known. You can't want wealth. You can't want legacy. You have to want impact or be irrational. So that's a weird aside.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Weird random history meets musical theater kid over here.
What would you say is the best investment that you've made, Andrew?
I happened to buy a few stocks in like 2010 where I happened to be in college, so I wasn't really invested when this crazy financial crisis happened, and I was seeing like 30% swings. And I I got decently lucky and got put some money into Apple close to the bottom there. I'd say the worst investment is whenever I took it out, straight up. Straight up. It was closer to 2010 than 2020 when I took it out, and that was dumb. Stocks only go up, right? No. It's so no, I used to put my trader hat on closer to college times. Since then, I feel like my investments have been like in me, right? Like, again, we'll see if day one pans out. It's almost certainly going to pan out either. It was not certainly to pan out financially, but it's either going to pan out as a successful thing or as a ride that I'm glad I went on, right? So this is probably the more poignant answer of the best investment is putting my time into something borderline irrational to go see what might happen.
Love that. And you kind of hit on the worst investments. I don't know that I've got another one there. It's taken.
Yeah, selling my stocks in 2013 or 2014 or something. Like, oh my gosh, did not have those diamond hands as people say these days. Jeez. Definitely did not.
Yeah. So Andrew, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sitting down and kind of sharing your experience and story, as well as just, expertise in the startup space. It's been really, really great. I want to leave you with the last word. So anything that you want to impart the audience with, and then also please let us know how we can connect with you, with Day One, or any other entrepreneurs that just, want to kind of take the conversation offline if you're open to it.
Absolutely. 1,000% open to it. If you start Googling us, I think you'll find us these days, but we're joinday1.com, and we are running our fellowship cohorts about every quarter. And so we are running cohort 3 in the spring, this coming spring. And so you can find that. We'd love to see you apply. And yeah, that last word is, it's around investing, meaning invest in this semi-irrational thing of being an entrepreneur. You will almost certainly reap the benefits one way or the other. Don't just kind of play at it, right? There's a lot of thinkers and entrepreneurs out there. The difference is when people put something into action. And so doing that makes all the difference. It's not easy. It's hard. That's why we build communities to help people do that. And then knowing it's hard, if it makes sense to invest a little to see some of that outcome, that's why we're building Day One, to invest a little to help you make those moves, make those jumps that have those 10x outcomes. So we're here to enhance, and we're here to power a whole wave of entrepreneurs that is already happening. If you're getting in the game, if you're just getting started, we want to help you get where you're going. So last word, appreciate it, William. This has definitely been a pleasure and a lot of fun.
On your way out, please go ahead and share the podcast with others. It's the only way that the community grows. And be sure to pound that subscribe button so you get notified when new episodes air. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Hope you have a very profitable day.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place. Some words got you searching for the bright side over